iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money. Kia ora, good evening New Zealand. This is day 26 until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our three predictions tonight. Prediction 1. iPredict saw John Key swing up to 92% chance of becoming Prime Minister directly after last night's debate and then trend down to 89% today. Are national supporters getting over-enthusiastic about their man, or a rational analysis of what happened last night? Prediction 2. iPredict is saying that Jacinda Ardern only has a 24% chance of winning Auckland Central. Is National's Nikki K too strong, or has the market underestimated one of Labour's rising stars? Prediction 3. iPredict is predicting Hone Harawira only has an 81% chance of winning Tito Tokerau. Is this the best buy, or will Kelvin ruin Mana's day? To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. She is one of the great hopes of the next generation of Labour Party MPs, Auckland Central candidate and Jedi Knight, Jacinda Ardern. And he is the NBR political columnist and moral shepherd of the right, Matthew Hooton. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with a final prediction. But let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. After the debate last night, John Key jumped to 92% chance of being Prime Minister and then slipped down to 89%. Is this rank market manipulation from nervous National Party supporters being over-enthusiastic, or a great chance to make 10 times your money by shorting this punt after Key's mediocre leaders debate performance? Jacinda, after almost 3 years of writing Gough off, with leadership coup rumours spread on right-wing blogs and dutifully presented as actual news by the mainstream media, Phil had to come out swinging in last night's debate. The market says he did. How do you think Phil performed? Does the market have it right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, those who have watched Phil, who know Phil, who see him perform in the debating chamber of Parliament probably had a pretty fair idea that that would be what we would get last night. A really strong performance from him. It seemed to take other people by surprise. I wasn't surprised. I'm not sure whether Matthew was, because he probably watches Parliament TV as a political boffin as well. So for me, that's an expected result, what we saw. The fact that punters are starting to now perhaps put him back into the game, I think we'll see that be a trend that continues.
Oh, he did okay. I mean, there's no doubt he did okay.
Yeah.
And I'd say it was a draw between the two of them. I mean, they're both accomplished performers. Phil Gough has been in Parliament since 1981. He was a cabinet minister in 1984 in the Longy Douglas government. I mean, he's been through all that stress when he introduced, corporate measures into the housing portfolio as housing minister. He introduced student fees. He proposed the student loan scheme. He was the victim of student protests through the 80s when he was Roger Douglas's right-hand man.
He's been around.
He's been in these sorts of environments before.
But he's also been written off. He's also been someone who's been written off as a bloated corpse that was going nowhere.
That was always silly. He was our trade minister that negotiated the free trade agreement with China. Of course he should hold his own.
So he surprised viewers? You think he surprised viewers?
He probably did, because he has had a bad press. And I think also his role is to inspire the Labour Party base, try and get Labour Party people wanting to deliver their pamphlets. And I think his attack
his role is to win the election.
Well,
and that's what I thought. The tone was really interesting, because last night, I think probably there was a bit of an expectation that you'd have John Key there kind of commanding the debate and really having this strong presence, because he's touted as Mr. Charisma. And yet I felt he looked backed into a corner most of the time. And some of it was very symbolic. The way that Phil directed his thoughts, his line of questioning to John Key, rather than to Guyon, I thought was a really interesting
tactic.
Matthew,
modern politics is style over substance. Throw in a couple of drunken sailor one-liners, attack John Minto and appear as relaxed as a Prozac overdose, and you win the majority of New Zealanders. Do you think the market is correct at 89%? Doesn't Key's shrugging flippancy make him the winner?
Well, what he has is a situation where he has preferred Prime Minister of about 75%.
Yeah.
So he's overwhelmingly popular. I don't think he's overwhelmingly popular because of charisma. I don't sort of see him as someone who gives brilliant speeches
He's
or
laid
anything like
back,
that.
isn't it?
It's because he's laid back, and that came across. To tell you the truth, I found it incredibly boring last night. I don't think that it was one of the dynamic debates. I think TVNZ's.
What was? When have we had
Well,
a debate?
I thought what went wrong was state television tried to put together a whole lot of different things. The way the US presidential debates go is they have a panel of 3 distinguished reporters or journalists, and they ask questions, and there's no time limit really on how long people can answer, and they walk around and they talk to an audience. So TVNZ sort of had that with that strange panel of, was it Fran O'Sullivan and Wallace Chapman?
Who I think was actually the highlight of the entire
But then they
show.
also had these, tweeting and people having video questions, and then they
Awful
had,
questions.
And then they had Guyan, and then they had John Johansson, and I think it was a mismanaged debate, and it would have been better had it been that panel of 3 asking serious questions. Both of them are up to it. Both John Key and Phil Goff, especially Phil Goff with his history in politics since 1981 as an MP. They are people of depth and substance.
Yep. If Sainsbury is the walrus, Guy and Espen are certainly the Eggman. Do you think that Key's relaxed demeanour does appeal to New Zealanders, doesn't he? Because we're a casual, laid-back folk, and they kind of connected with that.
Yeah, and I think that probably gets you to a point. But what all the separate kind of polling tends to demonstrate, I think, is that although Key might rank highly in the stakes that are just about him as an individual, when you start breaking it down into policy issues that he is essentially fronting, it doesn't look so rosy. So if you start breaking it down into asset sales, cost of living issues, etc. So what I think these debates do, though, is attach the man to the policy. And I think it's going to be hard for him to keep separating those out.
Interestingly, if you look at a lot of the online polls today, Breakfast's one on their Facebook was saying that Phil won by, 52%?
You still call a Facebook poll a poll?
But I don't think any of those polls.
Poll.
That poll last night is ridiculous.
The text one.
They're all ridiculous.
Okay.
How much were you paying?
75 cents. I think the proper 1,000 people polls, even with that landline issue, are fairly accurate, and of course iPredict
But not as accurate as iPredict.
Well, no.
Question to both of you. What will Phil and John do differently in the second debate?
I think probably, this is my prediction, I think we'll probably hear from Phil more about Labour's vision and plan. I think it was really important to use this debate to create some context, though.
Yep.
It may for some people have seemed like we were talking about National more than perhaps we were talking about ourselves, but it really was important, I think, to write some of the complete misnomers. I think there was a lot of inaccuracy that's been coming out of the slogans that I've heard National MPs and the Prime Minister using. We had to come out defending ourselves against those. That debate was used for that, but I think we'll see a lot more about our plan.
One of the passionate moments was over Afghanistan. Is Phil going to get back into that issue in the second debate?
I think, some of these are driven by where the MCs wish to take them. But, I think what people saw perhaps was that these are issues that Phil personally feels very strongly about. Afghanistan. I think also when he was asked the question about protest movements by Wallace, I saw Wallace's commentary later in the evening. He wasn't satisfied by that answer, but I thought it was a pretty good one. I wanted to see Key talk about the Springbok tour.
Well, Fee,
what are they going to do differently?
Well, I think probably Jacinda's right. She'll have that inside information. I think Labor does want to try and outline what it thinks the world would look like, or New Zealand would look like in 2014. He didn't do that. Coming back to the Afghanistan issue, I think, unfortunately for Phil Goff, he totally lacks credibility on that issue. He was Helen Clark's foreign minister and defence minister. He was a strong hawk for the Afghani war. Labor took a very strong line. They were right there with George Bush.
And what year did we withdraw?
Well, you didn't withdraw.
2005.
You didn't withdraw. You
SAS
still had
SAS
people
came
there.
out.
You
SAS
still had
came
people
out.
there. Now, you still had people there, and you know
although Haga does
SAS
suggest
don't
that
believe
Haga does suggest that the military weren't actually advising or telling Labor what was
and there were, of course, New Zealand SAS in Iraq. Let's just pretend, not pretend otherwise, even though they weren't wearing New Zealand flags. But look, I mean, he was a hawk on that, and he's promising now to bring the SAS home 2 weeks earlier than John Key. And then his answer, he will never send them back to Afghanistan no matter what.
Surprised that you're running the
I
national line
Well, no, I
there.
think that...
It's a rotation.
Are you surprised by that?
No,
There's a
what I thought was...
rotation.
No,
They're
if
not
you
coming
just think,
home.
I thought what was interesting... Normally, politicians are taught, and
Yep.
Phil Goff was acting this way, I will take them out of Afghanistan, I will never send them back. And normally you think that's the strong line. But John Key's one says, oh, it's highly unlikely.
I know.
Now,
Wasn't very strong,
but I
was
thought,
it?
no, but I thought, ironically, that's part of his appeal because
Yes.
that's the honest answer.
Yes.
Phil Goff, if he becomes Prime Minister, can't tell us for sure that no matter what happens, he'll never send SAS back to Afghanistan.
Is
It lacks
that the
credibility.
reason when the question about whether or not politicians lie, he referred to what was a dynamic environment?
Well,
I'm going to
Yeah,
use
no,
dynamic
yeah,
environment
yeah.
when I'm in trouble with my girlfriend.
Yeah,
next,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I'll tell
Hey,
you
it's
what,
a dynamic environment.
I had a few drinks, a dynamic environment
and I
rose.
think where John Key lets himself down is on the superannuation question, which is the one area where he seems to have this absolutely fixed policy. Now, it's not credible. The credible thing for a Prime Minister to say is, this is the sort of person I am. I'll usually keep my word.
Yep.
I have got these promises. I think they're important, but I'm not going to sort of carve them in stone because that's not how the world operates.
Do you think Phil's... I expected more from Phil on the asset sales and more heavy punches on that last night. He kind of... A couple of swing and misses. A couple of swing and misses there.
Well, asset sales is the strongest
Yeah,
Labour
yeah,
position. That concept polls terribly badly,
Yeah.
and the reasons for asset sales are complex.
He's got to
and,
lift his
and,
game on that,
and
isn't
I think he should go for the jugular on that.
Right.
Unfortunately, if he does go for the jugular, that might then mean that Key gets to put them in the context of the fact of the matter. The government
I think
currently...
he did come out swinging on that one, actually.
Well,
I mean, I thought there were actually stronger points in the debate, but I still thought the point was strongly made. But what I thought was really interesting, the question over what mistakes have you made? And I mean, Phil a really strong point. I was part of the government that sold assets.
Yep.
That's why I'm not going back there.
The BMW sale was ridiculous.
The
Well,
BMWs, and when he clarified, when Guyon clarified and said, so you shouldn't have bought them, he said, no,
it's just the way
I should have explained it differently. I thought.
Hey, we've got to move on. Both of you, John Key at 89% chance of winning as the Prime Minister. Would you bet that? Would you buy that stock because it's a sure bet, or short it because the election will be much closer?
Oh, it's going to be closer in an MMP environment.
So you're
it's
shorting it?
much more. Yep.
Would you buy it at 89%?
I think it'd be a hold. I think
A
John
hold?
Key will win, but I think there's better returns to be made elsewhere on the iPredict market.
Right.
So there's other stocks
me.
that I'd
There you
trade.
go. There you go. Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. iPredict are predicting that Jacinda Ardern only has a 24% chance of winning Auckland Central. Jacinda Denise Roche took 4,592 electorate votes in 2008. Nikki Kay only won by 1,497 votes. If you appeal directly to all that wasted Green electorate vote, this election is yours, isn't it? Surely, of any voter group, Greens would want to recycle their votes, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it will make an incredible difference if that is what Green voters choose to do. And I guess the difference between this election and, say, the last or the one previous is last election was the first time that the seat shifted to the right.
Yes.
And so now I guess there's some evidence to Green voters of what can happen in this dynamic MMP environment, and that a strategic vote would make a difference.
Because that's a vast chunk of vote that's going nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, individuals, when they cast their electorate vote, do so for a swathe of reasons, but I have had a lot of people who have in the past two-tick Green who have said to me that they are planning on strategically voting this time round. And
So will you be driving that home, that a vote for Denise Roche electorally is a vote for Nikki Kay?
I don't necessarily always use those words, but I think most voters understand that can create that result.
Matthew,
absolutely.
this has to be a buy, doesn't it? The biggest reason Jacinda will do much better than the 2008 result is because Jacinda isn't Judith Tizard. Come on.
Well, Judith Tizard had her faults, but she
listed many
well,
of them.
she was, though, the Minister for Auckland Issues. She had been a long-serving MP for the area. She was a very close friend and confidant of Helen Clark.
That's
so
right.
she had a certain appeal. The other thing is that back in 2008, the Labour Party was able to run a line, which was a fair enough line, saying that John Key was this sort of secretive business round table spy that was in fact not a moderate, but he had this evil hidden agenda he was going to impose on the population, and that would have scared some voters. Well, that sort of line now, or lie, now, in fact, is no longer credible. So I think in this seat, which is
Wait, it's because
which
the
is
agenda
liberal,
wasn't hidden, right?
yeah. Well, we've found out
Yes,
that John
it's
Key.
quite open.
No, we find out that John Key is a moderate, doesn't do very much, doesn't scare the horses, does keep his promises. So
Except on GST.
well, that is a disputed
Yes,
thing.
yes,
But
yes,
in
yes,
general,
yes.
compared
Yeah,
with previous
yeah,
governments, the
yeah,
Longy
yeah.
Douglas government, Phil
Okay,
Goff's,
yeah.
or
Phil
Phil
Goff,
Goff's
yeah.
Longy Douglas government, or the Bolger government, this is kept. And so I think this probably will stay national. National is determined to win it.
Mm-hmm.
Murray McCully tried in 1975 when
Yep.
he was the young thing then.
Yes.
National won it, was very proud to have won it in 2008. I think we'll see John Key in this electorate an awful lot.
You were writing Judith Tizard off as the Prime Minister's handbag. So were many on the right. There was certainly a lot of people who didn't like Judith.
Well, that's my view of her. But within the electorate and Labour voters, I think. I mean, you have a positive relationship with Judith.
Lovely,
as
of
your,
course, Auntie Judith. We
I
all
have
love
a
her.
positive relationship with all of the
Yeah.
Labour Party members, of
Yes.
which there are many.
And you would have learned a lot
in
from
central
her.
Auckland.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, the point is that this is a different election because we've had a significant shift last time, and now people, I think, will be thinking about their individual electorate vote. And we are, the national candidate and myself, are the only ones campaigning for electorate vote. You know, so it does make it a two-horse race, and I guess my appeal is to the entire left, and that includes those who are Green Party members.
problem, though, you have
but
is-
I have to accept as well, I have to earn their vote. I'm not taking anything for granted in this seat.
60% of Green voters, according to some polls, would be happy with a coalition with the National Party. The Green Party under Russell Norman has repositioned itself to the
Much to
centre
the
a
right,
little bit.
yes,
Now, in
yes,
this
yes.
particular
Centre
electorate,
right?
centre right, well, centre, but in this particular electorate, there are blue-greens. There are people who are green but also high-income earners.
Yep.
And I think with Nikki Kaye's bold and courageous stand against mining,
Oh,
which she
come
succeeded.
on, Matthew, come on.
She stopped
Come
mining on. She stopped mining
did
on.
not. 40,000 people marched down Queen Street. They
Well,
stopped mining.
She took a bolt. She got in huge trouble. She was bollocked
She
by the
did.
Prime Minister in caucus.
That
and
is not true.
that is true.
There
That
was an OIA request that demonstrates that permission was given to her to release a press statement on
she
it.
was bollocked by the Prime Minister on that. She took a stand, and there are some Green voters who I think will be. There might even be people wanting
Well,
to
let's
vote Green.
get into
and
that.
National.
Auckland Central is
Well,
a
it's a good
symbolic
point.
seat. Hold on. Auckland Central is a symbolic seat, and let's give Nikki her due. She has door knocked the entire electorate and is intensely ambitious, intensely. With the demographics changing to more affluence in Auckland Central, will the country's highest educated electorate and formerly safe Labour seat eventually become a safe national seat?
I think this is much more a bellwether seat. I think it has it will be, I think, more like a Wellington Central in the future.
Okay.
And
Oh no, it's much more sophisticated. I've lived in both Auckland and
Don't
Wellington.
write off Auckland Central like that.
we
My
don't-
God, we're
when
far
I
more
say that, it's
sophisticated
a
than Wellington
thinking
Central.
urban liberal
Oh no,
electorate.
it's far more thinking than Wellington. Wellington Central is a bureaucrat's town. This really is the most thinking electorate, or one of the most thinking electorates in the country.
And that's why it's so symbolic.
But because of that, I think voters in this electorate would be highly unimpressed with John Key's ridiculous stance on superannuation.
Right,
I
yep,
think this
yep.
is an electorate where people would understand that the superannuation age has to go to 67. But equally, I think voters in this electorate are more likely to understand that the absolutely idiotic position on state and enterprises of the Labour Party, they're going to hold a $40 billion portfolio frozen in perpetuity.
I offer to take the door knocking?
I think in
Because
this
that is
electorate,
not
Take
the
it.
message
Well, maybe
I
you-
get.
What are they saying to
That
you
is
on the
I
door?
think you'd
on
find
the
in this
door.
electorate. I think you'd find in this electorate people would understand the more sophisticated argument that Trevor Mallard put forward, which National has now adopted. When Trevor Mallard was Helen Clark's SOE minister, he gave a series of speeches on exactly the same policy that John Key's talking about. That it's important to manage that portfolio. The New Zealand government owns $220 billion of assets.
Thank God.
Even with these share transactions that have been talked about, the government's total portfolio, even of commercial assets, is going to keep going up, up, up. So, in fact, it isn't even true to say in net terms there's any privatisation planned under National.
Final question on this. iPredict says that's a very optimistic view.
Well,
iPredict
that-
says
no, but they'll understand that.
I'll take your door knocking.
iPredict
Well, maybe
says
you're saying they don't understand
Jacinda only has a 24% chance of winning. Would you buy that stock because Jacinda has a much higher chance of winning than that, or would you short that stock because Nikki has it in the bag with her tiny
I think
1,497
the
majority?
people who
Where are you going?
I think the people who are backing me are in for a nice windfall.
Nice windfall. Come on, how close is it going to be?
I think if you
1,500
think,
majority?
well, I think either way it's a buy. If you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Jacinda's going to win, then at 25 cents, that's a 300% return in 4 weeks.
Yep.
Equally, if you think Nikki's going to win at 75 cents, you can make a 33% return pretty quickly. So whichever you want to, which way you go, there's money to be made.
Okay, thank you, panel. Moving on, prediction 3. predicting that Hone Harawira has only an 81% chance of winning Te Tokoro, despite today's Te Karahuri Digipoll showing Hone ahead by 42% over Kelvin Davis's 35%. Matthew, if we accept the landline bias in one of the poorest electorates in the country, and that previously they had claimed Hone was only ahead by 1% when he won by over 9%, in the by-election, that 42% landline poll is closer to 50%, and this is a massive buy, isn't it?
Well, the risk, I guess, that the market is pricing against Hone is he's not on TV during the election campaign, whereas the Labor Party is.
Oh, he's been on in the weekend. He's
well,
on a lot of shows.
he's not. He doesn't have any.
He doesn't have any. He's got no profile.
He doesn't have any
That's
free. No,
extraordinary.
but he doesn't have any free advertising time.
No,
that
he
other parties do.
they didn't apply.
I think also the risk is that Kelvin Davis from Labor is a very strong candidate for Labor. I think that Kelvin will probably not be in Parliament at all if he doesn't win this seat. For some reason, the Labor Party bigwigs have decided he should be ranked low on the list. I mean, he's behind people like Darian Fenton, for goodness sake, and Sue
Don't be mean to Darian and Sue.
Parakura Horomia. So
well, okay, on that case, perhaps.
he's way down at 23.
23. No,
So he's most likely not to be in Parliament.
that is not a low placing.
Well, it's lower than Darian Fenton. So here's the thing. He's a good candidate. I hope he does get back. But the issue is maybe Labor wants Hone back because it can't hurt Labor in the long term to have a coalition partner on the left that's totally impotent, the way National's got ACT on the right that's totally impotent. And coalition partners on your extremes are great because they go out and get the true believers, but they don't do anything in government.
Kelvin claims today that the Māori Party candidate's support at 20% is hampering his attempt at winning the electorate. Could we see a dirty deal between Labor and the Māori Party to shut Mana out altogether? Phil Goff says he won't do a deal with Mana, and every time David Parker opens mouth, he's attacking Hone as a radical. Could we see a dirty deal?
I don't think I would call it a dirty deal. What I think will happen though is that I mean, I think actually it'll come down to voters looking at what's happening in the polls in the same way that what's going on in Epsom. People start making the decision about where they're going to go depending on who the two front horses are. I think it's becoming very clear that this is again coming back down to Kelvin and Hone, and I think Māori Party voters will start then looking at where they put their vote back.
Right.
I think it will predominantly go back to Kelvin, and I think it will end up being a very close race, and I think he will take it.
Well, I think that's good for New Zealand, and if there are national voters in their electorate, hopefully they also support Kelvin Davis from Labor.
Question to both of you, if Mana do bring in extra seats via Hone's electorate, isn't it in Labor's interests to see them go through to change the parliamentary math?
Yeah, I mean, most of the discussion we've had about Mana in the media has always been about the relationship with Hone. I mean, he couldn't even manage to maintain the relationship with his own party. So I think there are some indicators. His own party were doing some pretty awful things, weren't they? Fair,
I mean, let's be honest. Plenty of reason to walk away from the Māori Party, wasn't
absolutely. But, you know, Hone's never struck me as being a team player, you know, and it will be interesting to see whether or not Mana can keep itself together, given that they're having to deal with such a very strong personality.
And the number two would be Annette Sykes.
Annette Sykes, John Minto, and Sue Bradford.
I don't think most people would say if there is to be a further Mana MP, there'll only be one more. So it would be Hone Harawira and Annette Sykes. I'm sure the party would split again before the 2014 election.
Question both of you. If iPredict are predicting 81% chance of Hone winning, would you buy this because it's a sure thing, or short it because Kelvin will come from behind? You're saying short it.
I'm going for a straight 3.
You're going for shorting it. You're shorting it.
Calvin, I'm backing him all the way. You're absolutely right. He's a competent and excellent candidate, and
but
so
was
that's
beaten
where
by
I'm
9% in the by-election.
It was close. Turnout was
9%.
Turnout was so low.
By-elections always have low turnout.
It was incredibly low turnout, and we have the kind of structures and mechanism in the Labor Party to get our people out. I don't know that the Mana Party has that organisation on the ground. By-elections with their traditional low turnout, in a general election, it's much easier to get everyone.
Look,
out.
I think Hone is a buy.
Yep.
In the end, Phil Goff can't become Prime Minister unless Hone wins that seat and brings in Annette Sykes as a coalition partner.
And John Minto and that
Well,
lovely
I don't-
Sue
John
You
Brennan.
know
Minto's
that's
not
not true. That's not true at
Well,
all.
the way the numbers are going, he needs everyone in.
Yep.
The only way Phil can become Prime
Well,
Minister
iPredict
is a
has been
coalition
predicting
of
this.
everyone. I think you'd find that in the end, Hone will get there. So it's a bye.
Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with final prediction. Matthew, your final prediction this week is?
Well, there's 3 seats, Christchurch Central, Christchurch East and Port Hills. I think they're all Labor. They
All
always
of
have
them?
been Labor,
Yep.
and I think they'll be held by Labor. But they're trading at 82, 87 and 89. I think they're all buys.
Buys.
And I think buy them up to 95, 96, 97 cents.
Jacinda, your prediction, final prediction this week?
I endorse your prediction. My final prediction, John Banks is going to tank in Epsom.
Really?
Well,
No, I'm loving it. Tell me more.
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I just think I think this is the last.
It's over
last
for
swan
ACT?
song. I think it's over for ACT.
Wow. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Jacinda. To my final prediction, the mainstream media are claiming the First Leaders debate as a tie after denigrating Phil Goff for 3 years. A tie is far better result than this supposedly written-off Labour leader should have obtained. By holding his own, Goff has managed to surprise viewers who were told he was a bloated political corpse. This election will be much, much closer than the mainstream media are predicting. I'd buy Goff to be Prime Minister at 8 cents, even if I end up selling it before the election. No way will it stay as low as 8 cents for the next 3 and a bit weeks. Tomorrow night, I am joined again by NBR columnist Matthew Hooton and the youngest Member of Parliament, Gareth Hughes from the Green Party. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for iPredict Election 2011, exclusively on Stratus TV. Until then, get trading.